It was a startup cable network in the mid-90s where I first met my next guest. A time when we were all bright-eyed and somewhat naive to the ways of the broadcast world and news gathering in general. Yet here we are almost 2 decades later and finally reacquainting over issues such as a political party that needs to avoid shooting themselves in the foot and how the first president might react to what we deal with today. We did not have that first president on the roster back then in the 90s. Maybe we should have. A real pleasure to welcome into MidPoint the co-host on Fox and Friends, seated always on the right of your screen and seeking to bring decorum to mornings. Also co-author of the excellent tome on our nation's first president, George Washington's Secret Six. No, we will not be revealing stories from what really goes on in building a cable network for fear of being banished to MSNBC. Let us welcome Brian Kilmeade into the show today. Brian, it's a pleasure to see you, my old friend.
I'm honored. There's a problem, Ed. You're not getting older. That's an issue. I think we have to do a blood test on you. What's going on?
No. That's not true, because I've watched you over the years. There's something mysterious going on with you. I think you made a deal with the devil somewhere along the line, because you're still young Brian in many ways. You know that.
Right, and the Ed Bruner I knew has never made a verbal gaffe, and also used to have a mustache. So it kind of shocked me, still.
Used to, absolutely, but then again, we all have to move along with the times, and the people in our lives who say, if you bring that mustache home again, I'm leaving and taking the dogs with me. That's always
I got you.
Every time. Hey, Brian, first of all, let's talk a little politics here. I definitely want to talk about the book, but in politics right now, sitting here, the midterms, election day, do you think the Republicans finally have learned from the gaffes of the past, and they're not going to make the same mistakes they've made as they move forward now here heading towards 2016?
Well, if you're saying, do you think they're going to get the Senate and then have an agenda to move forward and have an era of cooperation rather than look how bad that guy in the White House is, I do think there'll be that. And I think Senator Portman and I think Senator Corker and Mitch McConnell, if he wins again, which he should, will be the leader. But I don't think there's any synergy between the two. In terms of what happens today, as you know, you can't talk about the whole league. You got to talk about the individual games. New Hampshire is a totally different ball game than North Carolina. New Hampshire and Louisiana are different. You have Kansas, which no one can figure out. I mean, Karl Rove told me in the hall, he's like, I can't figure out what's happening in Kansas. So no one actually thought that. And I think it's going to be very interesting what everybody thinks is happening in their life. They're going to vote that way, hopefully have already, or in the midst of doing that today. I'm fascinated to find out. Ed, I think the biggest joke is when people say this is an election about nothing. That usually happens after you lose a game. You think, well, that game doesn't really matter. No, it matters. I can't wait to see the results, because tomorrow we finally get to talk about what happened and where we go from here.
And we finally have the Democrats saying that we made a mistake. And many of them now are coming out and saying, no, you should not have separated yourself from President Obama. You should have made it a little bit closer together. You should have made sure you stayed the course. Brian, I don't think that would have flown with anybody at this point, because that might have to be one of the more laughable things I think that many on the left would hear today is, are you serious? You truly wanted me to run on the president's record? So even when they're imagining their mistakes here, they still get it wrong.
All right. Ed, this is what I would say. The average voter is not as into politics as we are. We love it, and we're knee-deep in it, and that's what we do every day. And I can't wait to find out what's going to happen tonight and tomorrow morning. When the clock goes off at 2:30, I cannot wait to see the collection of articles I'm going to go through and the people I'm going to interview. However, I think it's an insult to the average voter when a Democrat gets up who votes 95% with the president and says, yeah, I really want to talk about him. I really don't want to talk about him. Say, you know, I voted for him. I thought these policies were going to work. It really went bad, and here's what I would have done. Or I would have voted for the president, like what Alison Grimes said when she was a delegate for the president, but wouldn't admit who she voted for. That's an insult to the average everyday American walking the streets. Really? You might be disappointed in his approval rating and his performance, but don't pretend like you weren't a delegate for him, because whatever you say next, I'm not going to believe it.
Brian, do you think the average American really knows everything that goes on here as far as the issues that are concerned? Only reason I say that is because I'm reading now from an account at a Miami, Florida polling station today. It was a student at a local college who said coming out, the questions were hard to understand on the ballots, so I put whatever. Voting is voting. That's a little scary when you think about that this is a student, the next generation, saying, oh, it's no big deal. Voting is voting. I just kind of dropped something down because it looked good.
Yeah, I would say that's scary, and no one related to Ed Berliner would ever get away with that. Ed, you would make sure they have the competence to go and vote. I never tell someone not to vote, but when they said I put down anything, I'd hate to see their SATs at the end of the day. Can you imagine? How do they go through school? You know, I didn't really get that math, so I just wrote down anything. Now I got to go play in the yard. I would say this: when you watch Jimmy Kimmel, when you watch Jimmy Fallon, when you watch Jesse Waters with Bill O'Reilly, and you see some of the answers that people can't tell you how many senators we have in this country, they can't name the vice president, let alone the Secretary of State or Jack Lew, Treasury Secretary, it gets scary. I don't know, there's pockets of people that love it in the next generation, and there's a lot that get through school and do well and can't tell you how the American government works. So it's a little intimidating to hear stuff like that.
All right, I got about 2 minutes left. Let's make sure we point it out. George Washington's Secret Six, the spy ring that saved the American Revolution. Fascinating stories I don't think many Americans would really know. As we quoted in the book, and some people have said, Washington didn't outfight us. He actually outspied us. Boy, if only we had that happening today.
Yeah, Ed, where we worked in Port Washington, Long Island, when we first met, and that's when I first stumbled on this story. So I've been looking at this for 20 years. I couldn't believe Washington had a series of spies, this elite spy network made up of citizen spies that lived and died without getting any acclaim or any attention. It was top secret till 1930. We knew if we finally put together, Morton Pennypacker did in 1929, The Last Spy. But we never got the name of the woman. In the paperback, we have 7 contenders that could be so-called Agent 355. That was on the ledger that was created for Washington. So if they got caught, no one would ever know who they actually were. They would just know a number next to their name. So that's what we tried to do different in the paperback. But just know this, the CIA today told us in Langley, Virginia, the historian headquarters inside the CIA headquarters, they came out and said, we are in awe of what they learned in the middle of a war. We actually have to take our time and take a couple of years to teach our men and women before they go on a single mission. So the stuff they did is just awe-inspiring. I think that's why people are so into the story.
Not because I've known you for so long and I also respect you, but I got to tell you, it's one hell of a book. An excellent job done on this. George Washington's Secret Six. Brian, it's a pleasure after all these years to catch up with you again. Next time we're in New York, you're buying.
Absolutely, Ed. You got it.
It's always
just walk down the block. I'm 6 blocks away.
Hey, trust me, I'm right there because I know that you will buy and it'll be good. It's always a pleasure, Brian. Take care. Be well, my friend.
Thank you, Ed.
All right. Let's go ahead and remind everybody, too, that when it comes down to those midterm elections we've been talking about here, you're going to hear about it right here on the Newsmax TV network all night. 7 o'clock Eastern Time. The countdown to the midterms. Steve Mosberg will be there. He'll bring us a little bit of the preview. That's the pregame. Here comes the big game. The midterms, 8 o'clock Eastern Time until midnight. JD, John Bachman, the whole crew, we're here on the Newsmax TV network. And after a quick break, Newsmax and MidPoint continues.